All right, we're back here on the Chase Thomas podcast, where I'm now joined by a first-timer. He covers a team that was really good as I was growing up, and just it's been a little bit more rough in my late 20s and early 30s here. But San Antonio Spurs, it's all about Victor Wembanyama. It's all about Victor Wembanyama right now. I assume for Spurs writers, Spurs staffers, Spurs front office folks, Spurs fans, it's like the bottoming out has happened, where it's like you were a contender, and then you make the Kawhi Leonard trade, and then DeMar DeRozan keeps this thing kind of afloat, where you're a pseudo playoff team, and then it gets a little bit worse and a little bit worse, and now you're at this full-on rebuilding stage, what we haven't seen in so long, and it's just kind of wild to see where the Spurs are. I do a double take sometimes when I'm doing my daily just check-ins in the standings, and you're like, man, it's just so weird to see the Spurs at the bottom of the Western Conference. It looks wrong. But here to talk all things Spurs, we got Noah Magaro-George. Noah, good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm great. I'm ready to talk about the Spurs. I'm excited to talk to you about some basketball. So thanks for having me, and I'm really excited to get this thing on the road.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the first thing I want to ask you about, Noah, is in terms of on the court, what would you say has been the best thing about the Spurs strictly on the court? None of the draft stuff, none of the off the court stuff, just like what you've seen through 50 or so games this year right before the All-Star break. Like this has been the most encouraging thing about the way the Spurs have played this year.
Definitely. So I think a lot of people look at this team, whether you're, a diehard fan or you're a casual fan, or maybe you're just an NBA fan and you don't care about the Spurs. You look at the record and you go, wow, this team sucks. They're not good. They're not fun to watch. I had no interest in a 14, 15 win team. But I think the thing that's easily discounted is the way in which they have tanked. It's, to me, very unique compared to other teams. You look at teams like the Thunder a year ago, the Houston Rockets, the Pistons this year, who they're losing on purpose. They're not putting out functional lineups. They're not really trying to do anything except get a top pick. And while that's the Spurs' goal, right? They're trying to get that lottery pick. They're trying to win the lottery. They want Scoot Henderson or a Victor Wembanyama. They have fielded lineups that are trying to win, that are competitive. Most games, they are in the game for 1, 2, 3 quarters, and then they kind of fall apart in the fourth quarter. They're the worst fourth quarter team in the NBA. So I think just watching them foster development rather than just say, go play and do whatever you want, and there's actual structure and you can see that development. It is tangible on a nightly basis, from guys like Keldon Johnson to Malachi Branham to Devin Vassell, who's out right now but has been really great this season. I think that's been the best thing, because it's not just them going out there and giving up. It's them trying to win, and Coach Popovich still trying to hold these, 19-year-old, 20-year-olds, early 20-somethings accountable, which I think is really great for their development and their long-term outlook. So that's been the best part of the season for me.
What is Keldon Johnson's ceiling? Now that we've had a couple of years, have you adjusted? Do you feel like you have a pretty good idea of like where we're at with Keldon and what he can fully be? Is it fully maximized for you as to what he is? Do you think the staff has a pretty good feel in front office at this point, or do you think there's still untapped potential with him as a bigger star than maybe some folks maybe were like, oh, it's a possibility, but it's kind of changed to more role player type vibes with Keldon?
I think fans, for the most part, like Spurs fans, they've kind of had Keldon Johnson kind of like shoved down, their throats and kind of thrust in their face, because he's kind of the de facto face of the franchise now that they don't really have a superstar, an all-star, or anything like that. But to be completely honest with you, I've been watching Keldon since he played at Oak Hill High School. I watched him at Kentucky. I've watched him in the G League. I've watched him with the Spurs. He's a solid player, but in my estimation, just from all the tape that I've watched on him, the numbers, he's not a good defender, and he's probably like your third to fourth best player on a championship team on the offensive end. So he's a guy who can't really create his own shot that well. He gets downhill and he's good at attacking the rim. He's pretty good at getting to the free throw line, but he's not a guy who's pulling up off the dribble. He's not a guy who has a dynamic handle. He's not someone who, has a lot of shot versatility, coming off screens or shooting off the move or, catch and shoot in transition. He's mostly a stationary 3-point shooter. And whereas last season he was shooting 40% from three almost, this season the numbers have dropped because teams know what he is. He's the main focus, and it's hard for him to get an open shot just standing still. So kudos to him for doing the most with what he's got, which is not very much with the Spurs team, obviously. But to me, he's may not be at his ceiling, but I don't really see a superstar player or a perennial all-star. I see a guy who, if the Spurs are winning and everything's firing on all cylinders and they're, one of the best teams in the West, then maybe he's like your second all-star, like a Drew Holiday, who gets in because your record is so good. But on his own merits, probably not. And I know that probably hurts Spurs fans to hear, and I get backlash for that sometimes, but love him. Just, I think it's better to be realistic with what he is than lie to the fans.
Interesting. What's been the biggest difference between watching Dejounte Murray be the guy for years and then watching this team this year without Dejounte? Because, I'm a Hawks guy and watched a lot of Dejounte up close. And I love Dejounte. He's been the best player on the Hawks all season long. And he's just so much fun to watch on defense. And, I just make it a note to, every game is, he's who I follow around most nights because he's just so active and he's so smart with his hands. And he's long and he's fun. He's so fun in transition. He's shooting the ball really well of late. He loves the mid-range, but the three-point shot has been there. Good leader. I don't know. I've really enjoyed the Dejounte experience thus far here in Atlanta. But for you, watching this team without Dejounte this year, how weird has it been just him not being there and having different guys have to lead the show because he was just the de facto, kind of like what you were saying with Keldon, he was the de facto guy for so many years now.
Yeah, this may kind of come off as strange, but it's been refreshing not having him in San Antonio or a player like DeMar DeRozan in San Antonio as well. Those players are more heliocentric where they're the system and everyone else revolves around them. They get the team into their sets. That's probably not his role in Atlanta. I think he kind of trades turns with Trae Young from what I've seen, the 3 or 4 games I've seen this season. But it's been refreshing in that they've moved to a more motion-based offense that's equal opportunity. A lot of guys are getting touches. A lot of guys are getting shots. A lot of guys are getting primary ball handling reps. And that's been really nice. That fosters developments for guys like Keldon Johnson, guys like Devin Vassell, Trey Jones, Malachi Branham, Blake Wesley. You see all these guys who, if Dejounte was still here, they're probably running everything through him because to be honest, he's really not that great of an off-ball player. He's been better shooting the 3-ball in Atlanta this season, but still shooting below league average from 3 in Atlanta, still shooting below league average from the field in Atlanta. I love Dejounte. I think he's got a great work ethic, and I think he's done a lot to turn himself from a guy who was overlooked into an all-star. But I also think he's fairly overrated. Defensively, he comes up with a lot of steals, but I think sometimes fans kind of overlook or overrate the value of steals. They see activity and they equate that with defense, but a lot of times he's a gambler, right? He's going to gamble for steals. If he doesn't get it, he's out of position. He's leaving everybody else scrambling. And you look at his numbers. He's allowed his opponents over the last 3 seasons to shoot above 50% from the field, and that's just not very good. So as much as I love Dejounte, I think he's a phenomenal player. I do think he's become a little bit overrated, but happy to see that he's actually on a team that's competing because I think in San Antonio, he was miscast as the number 1 guy. And I think he was also being done a disservice that if he had stayed here, he would have just had to, tough it out for a rebuild, be carrying a team to the play-in. And to be honest, the play-in is not fun. Unless you're a team that's really on the cusp of breaking into that contender category, the play-in is nothing. It means nothing. So I'm happy for him that he's in a new place with better teammates. And I hope the best for him because he really was a pleasure to cover while he was here in San Antonio.
I like it. Jakob Poeltl, do you think he's ultimately moved this week?
That's a really tough question to answer, and that's a great question. Some people probably value him as a piece that you can add that pushes you over the hump maybe. And I think the Spurs value him as someone who can offer them stability as they rebuild because he doesn't really need the ball a lot, but he can also be used as a playmaking hub from the high post. He's one of the best rim protectors in the NBA this season. He covers for a lot of the mistakes on this young team. I just don't know that you're going to get that from anyone else on the roster. If you move Poeltl and he started for you all season, even though Collins has been one of the best backups in the league, I think there's still a pretty steep drop off there. And I think you move him and you're even worse, which, okay, that may be the goal to be worse, to get the better lottery pick. But at the end of the day, with Jakob, you're a bottom 3 team. Without Jakob, you're still a bottom 3 team. You can afford to re-sign him. He likes it in San Antonio. So I wouldn't be surprised if they, hold out because they want 2 first rounders, and they may not get that. And if they do, pull the trigger, do it, grab those assets. But if they're not going to get that, they might as well hold on to him, because it's not like they can't afford to pay him. They've got more than enough cap space.
But do you think, what is your gut telling you? If you had to say one way or the other after the deadline, do you think he's a Spur or no? Do you think they get what they want?
Okay. I think so. I just don't see, I love Poeltl, and I do think that they're right to value him for 2 first rounders. But if you're a contending team, giving up 2 first rounders for Jakob Poeltl, who is going to be entering, free agency this summer, could just walk for nothing. That's a lot. That's a lot to give up for what essentially is going to amount to a half a season rental. And I just don't see teams doing that. Maybe someone's desperate, maybe the Lakers, but even the Lakers, they have
Thomas
Anthony
Bryant's
Davis,
playing well,
they have Thomas Bryant.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's a tough situation. Maybe the Kyrie thing.
LA makes a lot of sense. The other LA, the Clippers, but it's I don't know what the Clippers would send. They're not sending 2 firsts.
And they still have
Jakob.
Zubac, right? Is he going to be coming off the bench? I really don't know what they're going to do there. So my gut tells me he's still in San Antonio after the trade deadline, but you never know. Crazier things have happened.
Devin Vassell is better at this thing this year than he's ever been.
Self-creation. That was one of the main things that I was pretty skeptical of him coming out of Florida State University. He was a guy who was mostly a guy who comes off of screens, pin downs, curls around screens, can catch and shoot a little bit. Didn't really create that much at Florida State. He had 2 dribble jumpers as a freshman, increased that to 37 as a sophomore. It's not like that's a prolific number. That's basically 1 per game. And this season in San Antonio, he's self-created nearly 62% of his offense, which that's a huge jump. I mean, even a year ago, he only self-created 24% of his offense with San Antonio. That's a huge jump. And to see he's become more efficient, that's pretty astounding. I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar level player or perennial all-star, but that kind of self-creation jump where you're able to manufacture shots off the dribble, get to your spots, that's pretty impressive. So I've been really happy with him in that aspect, and he's never been better at it in his career than this year.
So it seems like, is there still star potential? Is he a future all-star to you? Is his ceiling higher than Keldon Johnson at this point?
I think so. He's able to get to his spots better. He's smoother off the dribble. He's able to elevate better on his jumper. He's got a longer wingspan. He's got a higher release point. I think the last piece of the puzzle for him is maybe if he's to enter that all-star territory, he's going to have to start knocking down threes off the dribble. It doesn't have to be, at a Dame or Steph or, Anthony Simons level or something like that, but just a couple of game, and also figure out how to get to the rim more often. Because right now, he finishes decently at the rim, but that's because he picks his spots. He only attempts about 2 shots at the rim per game. It's not particularly high. He's only getting to the free throw line a couple of times a game. That's also not particularly high. So if he can do those 2 things, and those are big ifs, he can become an all-star. But time's on his side, right? He's 21 years old. He's shown a lot of growth this season. Unfortunately, he's injured, and he won't be back until after the all-star break. So we'll see if he picks up where he left off. But I'm fairly optimistic for his outcome to be an all-star, fringe all-star level player.
Do you think Pop sticks around longer if they end up landing Victor?
Wow, yeah. I would say probably so, because that sort of expedites your rebuild. Even if they land Scoot Henderson, who's also a generational talent in his own respect, I could see Pop sticking around. But that being said, he probably might stick around either way. He's been kind of reinvigorated by being able to coach the young players. He's talked about it with the media where, with Timmy and Tony and Manu and Bruce Bowen and all those veterans who were, either all-stars or all-NBA or all-defense caliber players, you don't have to do a lot of coaching up. You run sets, you ask them to do their job, they lead by example. But I think the thing that he has really mentioned, as he just has loved it this season, is being able to have these, as we mentioned, 19-year-old, 20-year-old, 21-year-olds, 22-year-olds out there who need to be coached up, who are learning the X's and O's of the game, who are learning the ins and outs of the game, who need to be kind of brought along slowly. And he enjoys that process of being able to coach them and coach them hard and teach them and hold them accountable. And he's just been a different guy, where it seemed like in years past he was yelling at guys and he was yanking them off the court and he was frustrated after losses, to now he's kind of come to terms with the losses and he understands that this is a process and he's enjoying being around the younger players. So, either way, I kind of think he's going to be here for a couple more years at the very least.
Sounds kind of like Belichick, where Belichick post Brady, people are wondering if he was going to move on. It's like, I don't know. I feel like some of those guys, the way they're wired, like Nick Saban, people are like, oh, when's it? It's like, this is what they do. Like, this is what this guy does. He's always done. And it's like, I don't think they're looking forward to retirement. I don't think Pop strikes me as someone who's just looking forward to life without basketball. It gives them something to do. It gives some of these guys something to do every day.
Exactly. And, I don't like diving too much into, people's personal lives and speculating, but, his wife, Erin, passed away a couple of years ago. His kids are grown up. They have families of their own. If he's done with basketball, if I'm him, what do you do, right? Like, what are you doing if basketball's been your whole life and your kids are adults and your wife has passed away? Like, this is a staple of your life now. It always has been, but now more so than ever. So I could see him sticking around. And on top of that, I mean, even if he doesn't want to coach, like say he becomes like Phil Jackson where he's just not able to travel anymore, I still see him being heavily involved in the front office.
Yeah, he's 74 now, so I mean, we'll see. I'm trying to think who would be the
oldest coach in NBA. He became the oldest coach in NBA history 3 years ago, and he's just added upon that record year after year after year for the last 3 years. So I thought he might be done a few years ago because he made a promise to DeMar and LaMarcus that, I'll stick around as long as you are here, and then they were gone. And he still stuck around. So it just doesn't feel like he's leaving anytime soon, which, of course, I'm fine with, and I'm sure Spurs fans are fine with as well.
If you had to guess who his successor is at this point, who would you guess?
I try to be as unbiased as possible and remove myself from like any fan biases, but the Spurs fan in me, having grown up in the city and been following the team since I was a child, wants to say Becky Hammon. Her contract will eventually run out with the Las Vegas Aces, but right now I think the most realistic person is probably Brett Brown. I mean, he's been Pop's buddy. He was a former assistant with him back in the day. He's been a head coach. He's led a rebuilding process in Philadelphia that's, not led to titles, but it definitely led to playoff appearances and deep runs in the playoffs. And, the players really respect him, and he's been a big part of the developmental process for these young guys. He's come in early with them, and he's worked with individual players. So I could see him taking over because it's just really tough to see, is it going to be Darius Songaila? Is it going to be Mitch Johnson? Is it going to be,
Bill Self was the rumor forever,
on, right?
And then it's like his son's now. Isn't his son the G League coach?
No, they moved on.
Oh, okay. So he's not the G League coach anymore. Okay. So he's definitely out. Bill Self is definitely not going to be that.
And he has a lifetime contract with Kansas, right? I mean, obviously that ends when he wants it to end.
Right.
But if you're Bill Self, you got a fantastic program at Kansas. I would milk that as long as I could because that's a great gig.
Becky Hammon will be the best story, though. I think Becky Hammon.
I think she would.
And I wonder, too. I mean, I guess we'll see what happens with Ime. Like, because Pop talked about him and being close with him. I wonder if he's brought back to the staff next year if he doesn't get a head coaching job.
That's a really great point, too, because I know they had just asked Coach Pop, some of the Boston media and San Antonio media, when they played the Celtics about, what are your thoughts on Ime? And he was like, I'm not going to go into personal life, but I will tell you I respect him. He's still a friend. We talk regularly. I know he's a great basketball mind. So I could see that. Even Will Hardy, if maybe things don't work out in Utah. But I think the Jazz have a good thing going there, even though they're not a great team. But he's really helped them, I think, exceed all expectations. And he's done a really good job in year one. I don't.
They're in a rebuild. They're
starting
starting this. I don't think the timelines match. Yeah,
exactly.
I don't know. Becky Hammon would be a great one. I mean, Brett Brown's, he's just sneaky old. That put him at like 64, 65 when he took over. If Pop does it a couple more years, then you're like, well, that won't last. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, you're immediately looking for a successor or like on the hunt. So I get what you're saying, but right now I would say maybe there's not an apparent, like an heir apparent that's super obvious. But
which is kind of wild. You would have assumed because he's been there for so long, they would have had a parent. But it's just they've been rated for so many years now that a lot of the heir apparents are just gone. They were there at one point, and then they're just gone because he's been there for so long.
Exactly. Like Sean Marks is gone. Monty Williams is gone. Mike Budenholzer is gone. Even, the head coach for the Grizzlies, who I'm blanking on right now.
Taylor Jenkins,
I mean, you could even throw Quinn Snyder into the ring.
I was going to say Quinn Snyder might be a sneaky,
Snyder,
interesting option. He's just sitting out there.
You never know. I mean, there's just so many options because that coaching tree is so extensive. I think it's going to be one of those things that we'll probably be surprised when it happens.
Yeah. Well, what can we look out from you, Noah, the rest of the week here on the Air Alamo front, the podcast front, the YouTube front? What do you want to plug as we wrap up here tonight?
Yeah, well, first off, I really appreciate you bringing me on. As far as plugging stuff, I just became the editor-in-chief over at Air Alamo, so I'm still getting acclimated over there. We've got a bunch of Spurs coverage, from game day coverage to pregame coverage to analysis to trade rumors and all sorts of hypotheticals over there. So check us out there. But as far as the podcast, that is on hold until we kind of finalize things. But Alamo City Limits, that will be the podcast. We're moving from SB Nation over to Fansided. And you can check out my YouTube channel. It's just my name, No Magaro-George. We're doing some film study stuff over there. So really enjoy doing that. Hope to get to that soon as I really get settled in with Air Alamo. But again, thank you so much for bringing me on. I had a blast talking Spurs basketball, and I hope you enjoyed it too.
Absolutely. Well, good luck with the merger and all that good stuff, and I'll have you back on soon.